This conference will now be recorded.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us at Stratodesk with another Tech Talk and a Tech Talk of panels. Looks like we got some great people participating today, and I'll give everybody a chance to do their introductions. Like I said, it sounded like most of the people today are actually from Tennessee, with the exception of James. James, we're glad to have you representing the European market space. So, James, why don't you go ahead and start with the introductions, and we'll go from there, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Sure, no problem. My name is James Rankin. I am a kind of independent consultant with a number of people who have me on retainers who would disagree with my independent sort of status. But I work primarily in the end user computing environment within financial services, because that's pretty big in the United Kingdom. I am based up in the northeast of England, which is why many people often mistake me for being Scottish, which I'm not. I don't have anything against Scottish people. I just am not Scottish. I just happen to sound a bit like one, and I'm a current Citrix CTP as well.
Well, good, awesome. Thank you for joining us, Richard or Rich.
Yes, I'm Rich Faulkner. I'm an enterprise solutions architect. I work for a company called Conversion Group that is out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, but we actually work with clients all across the United States and up into Canada. We adopted remote work at the conception of the company about 12 years ago. I am very heavy experience in end user computing and also a Citrix CTP.
Good, welcome again. Mr. Patrick, of course, everybody knows you, but you go ahead and do the introduction.
Yep. So I'm Patrick Coble. I'm the VDI hacker. I work at VDI Sec, where I focus on penetration tests and just VDI security audits and AD security stuff all the time. And I'm a Citrix CTP and a VMware EUC V expert. So I do a lot of VDI things.
Yeah, and myself, I'm Rich Severson. I'm the VP of Solutions Engineering at Stratodesk, and extensive background in thin client and computing devices, thin client management, and enterprise management tools for thin and edge devices. And so the four of us have actually had an opportunity to sit and chat a little bit about things that we wanted to talk about. And today's discussion is pretty much, it's open to about the environmental impacts and things that impact all of us, whether those things be automation tools, whether it be environmental tools, testing tools, applications, what kinds of applications are coming about today, and how that's going to impact what we do today as far as deployments, as well as what impacts things that we're going to be doing forward. I mean, example, one of the things that I've seen, and actually I was having a discussion with a customer yesterday, is they were talking about more and more people are deploying, SaaS-based apps and web-based apps and those kinds of things. And so, James, I wanted to talk to you, and you mentioned this when we had the preliminary discussion about, the different tools and actions, automation tools that you're seeing and using and deploying. And so I just kind of wanted to get your input on, what are you seeing as far as those types of impacts, those tools that are impacting EUC today, and basically with all the work from home stuff?
Well, I mean, we've obviously done a huge uplift towards work from home, right? And I mean, speaking from my own personal experience, right, we had thousands upon thousands of users based offshore in places like India who, themselves, their footprints, right, as workers were very, very big. Now, we had to shift literally tens of thousands of these people towards a work from home model. And I was speaking to one of the guys who was shifted to work from home. I was trying to help him out with some problems. And he mentioned that he lived 45 miles away from the office that he used to go to. And he'd actually saved 7.5 hours a day on his commute into work, which I found absolutely incredible. And he said, the traffic out there in India where he was, it was really quite horrendous. The amount of pollution, the amount of damage to his health and things like that. And obviously we're having to maintain offices for these people to work in as well at the end of their commute. And I mean, putting in place a remote working environment for them made such a huge difference to their lives. I mean, really, imagine having more than 7 hours a day back to do whatever you wanted. I mean, I can only imagine traveling 7.5 hours a day. He probably had only an hour or so before he had to go to sleep, to get up for work the next day. So I think And putting everything in to support these people to work from home has had a huge impact. I mean, we're moving away from having to have huge offices full of computers and maintaining our own data centers. A lot of it is shifted out to the cloud, but also a lot of the tooling and automation that we did, the building and provisioning of these systems. I mean, before we would have to send out, thousands of laptops when we took on new outsourced environments, or they would have to provision their own laptops and give them to their users and sort everything out. Whereas now we just get the credit card out and we spin up more servers. And because of the tools we've got in place, we're using things like Puppet and Packer and Ansible and things like that, all put together by my ops guys in wonderful ways that I don't really understand, but seem to work great. We can spin up thousands of systems in, under an hour to support these people, and it's all very low footprint. And on the other side as well, a lot of the testing that we do now is now done fully automated, which is another great way, because previously we had to employ full offices full of people just to do very basic testing, whereas it's now all done very, very quickly. So there is huge sort of impact that automation and remote working in general can have, not just on environmental sort of things, but on the very quality of people's lives, which is a lovely altruistic thing that you get to feel that you're doing something nice for people for once when you're putting IT systems together.
Well, and it's funny that you were talking about saving 7 hours of drive time commuting. If you've ever been to India, I can understand and appreciate the fact of not having to make those drives back and forth. I've been there, didn't care for the traffic myself, So, and I will tell you, it's funny that you talk about the, deploying the endpoints and those kinds of things. Obviously, it's pretty cool some of the stuff that we do with Stratodesk, as far as getting those endpoints out there, whether they be no touch OS or those kinds of things, to be able to set up on auto provision those devices, including the ability that we have now and have no touch center in Azure. So Rich, I mean, what kinds of things are you guys seeing and doing with deployments nowadays, as far as automation and getting those, infrastructure tools and stuff, getting that stuff deployed?
So what we're seeing is that you're still having to provide that capability based on who the user is, what kind of work they're doing, what kind of things they need to do. There are still some people who need to have a local, be a laptop running Windows 10 or a MacBook, and if we believe that the user experience is what the most important thing is, then that means that we need to give that user the tool that they want to use and allow them to use it the way they want to use it. I've often told people part of the problem that a lot of IT departments have is that they try to design the system the way an IT person would use it, not the way that a marketing person would use it, not the way that a receptionist would use it, not the way that a lawyer would use it or a doctor. And if we're going to make the end user computing experience to the point where it needs to be, I think we need to be able to be flexible and have that capability of, this person can get by with a terminal, this person needs a Windows 10 OS, this person needs a Mac OS X, but be able to provide that capability for all those people to work their best way. And in doing so, we enable the employees in the company to do their best job in the way that they prefer to do it. And I agree that I think remote working is here to stay. In fact, I don't know about other locations, but I know here in the States there's a lot of rumors going around about a possible second lockdown, third lockdown, whatever. Well, we're looking at here on with the COVID infrastructure, and those people who have planned for remote working were definitely better off when this started, and they're going to remain better off. So I think a lot of companies are starting to take a look at how do we do this, how do we automate it, how do we make it a lot easier, but still give the support that we need in the way that people want to work.
Yeah, well, and so from a security aspect, addressing all the different ways that people are working, Patrick, I mean, what kinds of infrastructure changes, tools, and automations, those kinds of things are you guys doing today?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people, to everyone's point, to Rich and James's point, when sending people home, and the biggest thing I've seen is a lot of people really having to invest in monitoring with tools like Control Up and stuff like that to be able to see how good or bad that user experience is now that they're home. And you start finding things out like that someone has the same Wi-Fi router for the past 10 years. and the impacts that has on their performance. And it's something they never thought about, because the internet at home has just been to save your data plan on your phone and to play video games and watch a little streaming here and there. And now it has to be relied on every single day. So I think that's the space that's in there, that's, you know, becoming more complicated, that people are going to have to continue to do, especially if there's another couple more lockdowns coming back, where some people have already went back to the offices and may have to come back home again. Maybe it's all going to be okay with them, but maybe now that two-person household, both are back at home working, and now they're competing for the same resources and contention on the Wi-Fi channels and everything else in between. So that's what I've been seeing a lot of. It's really kind of doubled down on monitoring. The security side's been kind of wild, because people just haven't been patching a lot of these endpoints because they didn't have a good plan when they sent them home. They just said, hey, we got to send everybody home. How do we patch them? I don't know. I've seen a lot of move to Azure Update Manager. I'd see people talking more and more about Tanium and things like that too. But overall, it's kind of the infrastructure at the house is the thing I hear a lot about, and then the security side and just patch compliance.
Yeah, infrastructure at the house is going to continue to be a challenge. And by the way, I mean, interestingly enough, our team just had a call with the Control Up team this morning, talking about some of the stuff that Control Up's going to be doing, and how we can integrate that and support that as well. And I'm gonna throw a little bit of a curve at you guys. So two things. One is, it was just pointed out to me, I'm using the wrong presentation, so I'm going to hit pause here and I'm going to upload the right presentation. But the curveball I'm going to throw at you guys is, you know, when it comes to operating systems, you know, obviously with the GA announcement of Windows 365 this week. So I'd like to get everybody's feedback and opinion on that. One of the things that, you know, I spoke with Scott Manchester from the Microsoft team about what they're going to do as far as a Linux client for that, because obviously Stratodesk wants to be able to support that as soon as that's readily available. And they talked about, you know, there isn't a Linux client for Windows 365 yet, but I suspect that that will be coming. And as soon as they do, we're going to support it as well. But so anyway, so we'll do a quick roundtable on what does everybody think of Windows 365 while I switch presentations. So James, your thoughts?
I was just having a look at some early reviews of Windows 365 not long before this call, actually. And I mean, it's something that we've been doing for years, right? And I'm very keen that it's easier for me, right, if users have a desktop rather than delivering apps to them when they're working remotely, right? Because it puts everything inside almost like a little bit of a perimeter, right? Everything's contained within there. You don't have all the funniness about, you know, applications spilling over into their ordinary desktop applications. You can put it across the user's full screen, and it kind of encapsulates them a little bit from a management. And I mean, I know security wise the same principles apply, right? But it just feels like you've got a bit more control there. Now, the Windows 365 thing itself, I mean, it depends on the sort of users that you're putting out there. If you've got a task worker kind of user out there who's just got a basic set of apps, then I think it's probably good. It's probably good for small to medium businesses. But in the longer term, I mean, we've spent a long time developing Citrix or other kind of broker-based solutions into very specific things with a specific stack of apps behind it that delivers things in very precise ways, right? I've got desktops for developers, for investors and things like that. And, you know, I'm just thinking of myself personally, right? I've got a machine with like 24 CPUs and 128 gigabytes of RAM. According to Microsoft, that'll cost me about $400 plus a month, right? It doesn't make logistical sense for me personally to look at that. So it's all horses for courses. But I mean, it shows that Microsoft is serious about moving into this kind of arena, this virtual desktop arena. But whether it takes, I mean, virtual desktops have always been a niche. I think COVID has kind of brought them a bit more to the forefront for people. And, you know, as an off-the-shelf service, it'll probably be quite good for a lot of people. But I think they've got a long way to go to catch up with the things that a lot of big companies out there have been doing with the likes of Citrix and other broker providers out there. But, you know, Microsoft always have a tipping point. I mean, there's better alternatives to Teams and OneDrive out there, right? But once you reach that tipping point of it being good enough, then it doesn't make sense to pay for the other. And I think if Microsoft is serious about this and they develop it and maybe they make some acquisitions that enhance the offering that they've got, then eventually they'll reach a tipping point where, you know, maybe it comes as part of your Office 365 license and people decide, right, we'll just jump across. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting too, and I think they need to do a better job of doing these announcements and deploying and releases of these things, because I think, to your point, I mean, there's a lot of people that are going to get confused about what should I be using. Should I be using AVD? Should I be using Windows 365 or the Citrix and those kinds of things? There's a lot of different things and different moving parts about how do you determine what I want to deploy. So Rich, being from a service provider and an integrator for customers, I mean, how do you guys typically make those decisions, and what's your thoughts on the Windows 365 announcement?
Well, I would echo the comment that I think for small purposes and quick, I've got a 5-person operation that needs to come in and do some stuff like that. I think the Windows 365 is an interesting idea, and those kind of functionalities. But from a security standpoint, from a power standpoint, and so forth, I mean, the majority of our customers that are running virtual desktops are running in the 4 CPU, 10 gigs of RAM range. And when I get into that, from a cost perspective, looking at whether it's Citrix managed desktops, WVD, or Windows 365, it becomes very costly very quickly when I start running those up. And then in addition, the majority of our deployments that we're doing now come with graphics capabilities. We're putting the NVIDIA cards in the hosts and putting them. And again, if I throw that on there, give it up. The expense really jumps up when I get into those machines in a desktop as a service type environment. So I think there's going to be a place for it, but I mean, some of the limitations for domain membership and those kind of things, where I'm trying to get that control. What we're seeing a lot with our customers is there's still a lot of data gravity that's keeping that data having to be in the data center. It's not allowed to be out in the cloud. And when I'm in that position, running even the virtual desktop in Azure and connecting back tends to cause an extra latency that is unacceptable for the users. And if we're trying to design the solution to fit what the customer is doing, I think there's going to be a part where the Windows 365 plays a part, but I think the majority of the ones that we do are going to be still running the desktop out of their own data center.
Yeah, I suspect as well. So, and Patrick, I mean, again, with it being a new announcement, I mean, what's your take on, what are the security implications are going to be? I mean, I would think that, things like screen captures and keyloggers and those kinds of things are going to be concerns for people. But, again, with it being
I think
new,
that's going to be a challenge. I think the hardest part for me, and I think James and Rich both echoed, is it's kind of a confusing message right now of which one should you go to depending on your size. So you have Microsoft 365 Business and Microsoft 365 Enterprise, and they just come with some different CPUs and specs, but it still seems like, I mean, if I'm wrong, but it's still a one-to-one relationship, whereas like the AVD is kind of the pooled broker desktop that we're used to. And so that to me is a big difference. And so thinking that there's an enterprise solution and a business solution, well, everyone, I guess, is a business, but how big is your business? And then how are you going to manage if you do Microsoft 365, right? How are you going to patch the thing, right? And then now each one of those things and the way the tenant rules work and the network security groups, I don't see either one being worse or better on the security, but I think AVD definitely has the edge because it at least has policies that control that. When I've walked through a couple people's next of setting it up, it doesn't appear like there's a lot of control of what comes in and out of that stream, that connection. Whereas AVD at least does, where we can block policies with copy paste and USB devices and stuff like that too. So it's gonna be time will tell, but I mean the security features are gonna, I guess, have to come, and the clients and everything else.
Well, yeah, and so yeah, and we jump to the next slide here. And again, everybody, we just use the slides just for kind of having reference talking points, if you will. So when it comes to auditing, enforcement, and those kinds of things, that's the advantage. One of the advantages from an endpoint perspective with Stratodesk is having all those capabilities, with the endpoints to be able to have assigned group inheritance and all those kinds of things. But yeah, when it comes to enforcement and reconciliation, you talk about the different operating systems, at the endpoints and different operating systems and applications. So being able to track that, across the enterprise, what are you guys seeing typically? I know there's a lot of people out there that are MacBooks. There's a lot of people out there that are now trying Chromebooks and those kinds of things. So how are you guys auditing and enforcing, the different operating systems? Are you guys making recommendations? And then, what are the issues when it comes to different application delivery on those different platforms? So,
Well, there's one word I can choose that always drives what I say when it comes to setting minimum standards, and that's teams. It's teams optimization is the only reason generally that we do any kind of enforcement of minimum standards for the connecting devices. And it's literally because if you don't optimize teams, everybody else, especially on a shared box, or maybe even not on a shared box, is going to get a bad performance. We've absolutely got to get that right, and that's what drives it. So we're using, originally it started off, we were just having to use basically kind of word of mouth, encouraging people to be on the right Citrix client versions and the right operating system versions to support it. But now we've got stuff coming in the gateway service in Citrix Cloud that can help us out a bit with enforcing certain minimum restrictions on machines. And, it makes a big difference because we regularly run reports from Director and say old receiver versions, old operating system versions, thin clients that can't do any offloading and things like that. And we've got to send the help desk round to chase them down. So yeah, we are trying to enforce those as best we can. It'd be nice to have lots of tools that could do that, and hopefully we'll get there sometime in the future. And security teams as well are mad keen on being able to enforce restrictions of certain levels. They're very keen on things like Citrix app protection, anything that reduces their kind of DLP exposure when they've got users connecting from potentially unmanaged devices and things like that. But yes, Teams is the number one sort of issue that I see when it comes to talking about the operating systems that we want to connect.
well, and it's funny, yeah, because a lot of people haven't realized that, now with the Teams optimization and certainly, Zoom and likewise, those collaboration tools are now starting to come out with, minimum hardware specification requirements to be able to get the the end user experience out of those. And so so that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about. But at the same standpoint, James, you talked about Citrix app protection. If you, don't mean to catch you off guard a little bit, but would you mind going into depth a little about that a little bit? Well, what it is, because I think a lot of people don't even know what it is.
Yeah, the app protection is a feature of the Workspace app at the moment. I'd love it to be in the receiver for web as well, but Citrix haven't taken that on board yet. It basically just lets you, you can mark certain sets of applications as being done by app protection, and when a user installs their Workspace app client with app protection enabled, they can only launch app protection enabled resources. And what it does things like watermarking, it prevents screen captures and things like that. Patrick can probably tell you more about the features of it because he probably pays more attention in the security calls than I do, but it gives you some element of protection against that sort of DLP and kind of hijacking by keystroke loggers and things like that that would occur when you've got an unmanaged device that's potentially infected. It's currently only available, is it only available in the cloud offering, or is it on, no, it started out on premises only. It's now available in cloud as well, because I was very annoyed for a long time because I couldn't get it in cloud.
So, well, Rich, I'll come back to you in a second. So, Patrick, do you want to provide any feedback on the Citrix app protection?
No, James hit it right there. Having those abilities to make sure that your client isn't exfiltrating data or has a keylogger, or prevent the ability for a screen capture is a big deal. And it was always one of those things that people would always say after the fact, like, Well, then that means if you've got all this sensitive data, you're beaming to a screen somewhere in the world. Well, someone can just take a picture of it. Well, with watermarking, which is one of the Citrix features, you at least can know who did it, possibly when. You kind of have to balance how much data and what the opacity is of it so that they can still use it. And it also eats a little bit of bandwidth and CPU. But on the keylogger side and the screen capture side, then that can become very, worth it, and the juice will be worth the squeeze for the cost of it, especially in like the finance world and healthcare world, where that data is so critical to the business and reputation of the company that's delivering it, and you can't just play around with it. So a couple dollars a user per month can really go a long way to be able to know that those two attack avenues, the wall is closed, right? It's the game over for those two.
The compliance aspect of it, right? To make sure that they know, that way they can report and audit against it and those kinds of things. So Rich, and the reason I skipped over you for that is, one is I'd like to get your feedback on the security aspect and those kinds of things, but also being a systems integrator and service provider, I'm curious, how do customers feel and what's the approach when, to James's point, right? If you're talking to somebody about doing a deployment and having Teams optimization, and then, the discussion about endpoints. So let's say somebody comes to you and says, we've got a fleet of XYZ vendor thin clients, of course, obviously at Stratodesk, we can support all of them from an operating system perspective, but that doesn't mean hardware-wise they have the capability for the optimization. So, I mean, what's the receptiveness, and what's are there challenges when you bring on a new customer and say, by the way, you have to replace all your quote unquote thin clients because they're not going to work? I mean, how's that go over?
Well, I can say that that they don't tend to really like the idea of having to spend the extra money on those clients. I mean, I haven't met a customer yet who likes spending money. Most of them are pretty averse to spending anything other than what they have to. But the good news is that I think that a lot of companies are accepting that there are certain requirements that they're going to have to do in certain places they're going to have to be. One of the challenges we ran into recently with one of our clients was, and they had rolled out newer terminals, but I come to find out that they also rolled out Ring Central phone system, and that thin client did not support the Ring Central meetings app optimization that's available. If I was running Windows or Mac, I could do it. And so they're actually having to pivot and roll out Windows devices that we're now having to figure out how to harden them out. So a lot of it has to go into, how do we balance it out? How do we see what the requirements are going to be on that other end, and it really brings to light the requirements to do the testing in advance and everything. And I did want to comment, just if I could, for just a second on that, on the app protection side of that. The one thing I like most about the app protection, in addition to it being on-prem and cloud available, is that I can say, turn it on for these type of clients, right? So if it's a managed device and I know what it is, and I don't need to turn it on. I can take advantage of not doing that. But if I've got somebody connecting from a home machine or from a hotel or something like that, I can say, okay, now I want it enabled. Or I can also do, if I'm into the analytics and I've got the security stuff on there, I can say, okay, this person's reached a certain security level on the analytics. Now I want to turn on app protection or enable it on any connections that they come into, so that I can start recording and viewing and protecting myself on those things. So
that's actually cool. I was unaware that you could do it on a group or a use case scenario. It's not enterprise wide or organization wide. You can actually be pretty granular about who you determine needs to have app protection enabled for, and that's good to know. So
Dimmer switch.
Well, and you talk about Ring Central, obviously, with the the work from home and the work from home better, I guess, if you will, in the second year of doing this, that's one of the things we're seeing. We've been asked, and we've actually working on a relationship with Avaya where we'll be able to do Avaya natively with Stratodesk OS. And so that brings to the point, the SaaS or web apps, because as the WebRTC stuff becomes more prevalent and there's more and more applications, what is going to be the impact of SaaS or web apps on VDI? More and more organizations are starting to realize, well, we can do a lot of this just based on a browser. We don't necessarily need to have, a full VDI stack, but I guess that depends on the organization and the use cases, as with anything else, right? I mean, of course, with end user computing, it's all about the use case and the user experience. But I mean, as we've progressed, I mean, you guys have all been in this the same amount of time that I have. Obviously, when we started out with this stuff, it was all local Windows-based applications, and we had to do switch user to do the installs and all those kinds of things. And now more and more of these applications are becoming web available. But I know, Patrick, you had mentioned that there's a difference on what tools are available in the applications, and so as far as moving to SaaS or web apps. James, what do you think? What's the impact on VDI? Will there be a long-term impact? Is it just going to be only for some of the users? What are some of the applications that you're seeing are coming along? And obviously the new collaboration tools have a dramatic impact on what we all do from a end user computing and VDI type environment. So what's your thoughts on that?
I think an interesting one to look at is the obvious one, which is Microsoft Office, right? I recently did a project where the customer was only going to pay for the basic Office 365 licenses that gave them Office for Web. So I had to end up doing a full comparison between what you get with Office for Web and what you get with the full fat client. I was actually quite surprised by how so much closer together the two things are now. And I mean, the real only big drawback, I think, from for like an average user, not like an Excel power user or anything like that, right? But for an average sort of common or garden user, the main pain for them was they couldn't like just go into a network drive and start browsing through their files. They had to open it up from the web version, and it would just show you stuff in OneDrive or stuff you'd used recently. But beyond that, they have come quite closely together, and that might be one of the key things, because a lot of Citrix environments, particularly RDSH environments, are just done literally to deliver those Office apps to people, the full fat Office apps, whereas now they're coming so much closer together, and there is a web sort of presence to almost everything now, right? I mean, a lot of applications, especially old applications, when they're moving to a SaaS platform, you no longer need to remediate the old applications. You don't have to worry about them so much anymore. Having said that, on the flip side, obviously for any sort of level of power user who needs any sort of, like, as you say, rich web apps and things, rich applications and things like that with precision tools in there, the web apps generally aren't going to be enough, and especially not if you're going to use them on a mobile phone or a tablet, right? I've got a guy who runs his whole business and he edits his Word documents on his mobile phone, and I can't for the life of me understand how he does it, because that would just drive me absolutely insane. But as we get a new generation of users coming on that are more au fait with web apps, that might swing a lot further. So I think it'll be interesting to watch. Microsoft Office is almost like the sort of canary in the coal mine, as it were. If the adoption of the web version of Office can reach a level where it's almost as good as the full fat client versions, then we will see a pretty big swing around that, because there's a lot of Citrix farms out there that just do Office and a browser for people. That's definitely a big sort of a common sort of thing.
I could see trying to edit a Word doc on the quote unquote duo phones, right, where you have a much bigger screen. But yeah, to your point, I can't imagine trying to edit an Excel file or a Word doc on my phone. I mean, yeah, I've got the iPhone 11, right? So it's a pretty good sized screen, but I certainly would need my glasses to be able to modify and edit Word docs. I wouldn't do it on my phone. So tablet may be a different story, but So anyway, so Rich, again, what are you guys seeing as far as trending, as far as deploying applications, the user requirements? I mean, what are you guys seeing for demand nowadays?
So a lot of our clients are in the legal profession, about 70% of them, and the legal profession has got a lot of tie-ins, extra pieces, whether it's DLP or document management or other functions that tie into the Office applications. And what we've seen is those require the Office application to be installed, the fat client. They aren't working yet with the web versions and so forth. In addition to that, I mean, let's face it, there's still mainframes out there, right? I mean, I don't know that the desktop's going to die anytime soon, but I do believe that a lot of the applications are going to get rewritten and reconfigured and left and moved over to the web-based functionality. But I think when we do that, the company I work for, we do a lot of recoveries for customers who've been compromised from a security standpoint, and they're not realizing how that impact, now that I've moved all this stuff out to the web, what does that do to me? If I get compromised on board, I can protect a file server that I have my hands on. How do I protect that web data that's stored in OneDrive and SharePoint if what's compromised is somebody's credentials? So there's a lot more thought, I think, that's going to have to go into this and see how the impacts are going. And I mentioned earlier the data gravity also. There are some regulations as far as control on on what kind of data can be stored where and who can have access to it and how I control it. That a lot of people haven't answered the question yet. How do I get that moved up to a cloud-based application? That being said, I think SaaS apps are where everybody is developing, and I think that's where the demand from the end user is coming in, right? So the newer, my kids and their kids, as they come up, they're going to want that, be able to edit it on my phone and so forth. Me, I laugh at my dad. He's got his glasses and he's got readers that he puts on underneath, and I was like, I would kind of have to be at that point to try and edit a document on my phone, but the kids that are coming up these days, maybe they'll be all right.
Well, and we talk about moving from legacy apps, I guess, if you will, to SaaS apps and those kinds of things, and with that comes different security enforcements of for authentication, and it amazes me how many people today still, I'm just going to say it, as being lazy when it comes to authentication. I mean, I was speaking with one of my neighbors actually last week, because he'd sent me a text message asking if I'd received any random emails from him because he'd gotten hacked. And I asked him, if he'd had any secondary authentication enforcement or anything in any of his accounts, and he hadn't. And it just amazes me that, again, can you imagine, and I don't mean to pick on your space there, Rich, but I mean, so you take, you go into a law firm where somebody's been there for years and years and years, and they're lazy about their authentication, and you move them from legacy applications to cloud applications, and now suddenly you're forcing them to use, authenticator applications or 2FA, and the users get all upset because it interrupts, well, that's not the way I've always done it, kind of thing. So, Pat, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna jump in and say the worst part about it, and of course law firms are bad about it. Medical is bad about it, and you'll see it in a lot of enterprises. There are certain people that you can't dictate to them how things are going to be, right? And so if I'm in a law firm and the last name of the person I'm talking to happens to be part of the name of the law firm, I'm probably not going to be able to tell them this is how you're going to authenticate. It's very difficult, and it's hard to get them to understand that. But I can tell you, we recently recovered a large law firm that had gotten compromised, and it was because they could not dictate to that person how they would get in, and because of that, they had to leave an old legacy connection device in place. 99.5% of the company was all coming in through Citrix with MFA, and all that was enabled, but that one person, I'm not going to do it that way. I have to come through this old SRA appliance, and guess what? That was how they got it. So I think if we can get it across to them, and maybe we need to do it from a financial standpoint, and say, hey, look, if you get compromised, you're probably talking 2 commas worth of money that you're going to have to put out to recover from that. I think maybe that will start getting the attention of those guys, because it is very hard if their title starts with a C. If their end of their name ends in M.D. or something like that, it's very difficult to dictate to them how this is going to go. But I think in all of those cases, if you can go and say, okay, look, I'll do it your way, but you're going to be ready to write that check with 2 commas in it when you get compromised, because you're not doing it that way. Maybe we can get it across to them how important multi-factor is. It blows me away that people are not using multi-factor now.
So Patrick, I mean, are you doing those kinds of audits and seeing, those kinds of resistances and pushbacks, and if so, how
Definitely.
do you?
I think it's the older the company and the longer an employee's been in IT, the harder it is to get the MFA strategy around it. Whereas I see some of the younger generation, like say sub 30, they've become used to it, and say sub 25, like Twitter, Instagram, Snap, those types of things, they see multi-factor as like kind of the thing. And there's even TikToks about it, right? So I think that changes and it's generational, and some people are just kind of stuck in there. I do a lot of cybersecurity training at a lot of big companies, and that's one of the things I kind of harp on, is that one of the big advantages of multi-factor authentication is in many cases it's an alarm system for that logon, and in most cases it's also free. Now, as a corporation, you got to pay to play. And yeah, there's free solutions, but are they going to be the easiest for your users? I don't know. Does it have the best monitoring and UI? I'm a big fan of Duo because of that, and it's kind of become the industry standard, but it's more expensive than most. But then you still have things like Okta and things out there that, depending on how many SaaS things you have, can actually be a better solution, because you can still have Okta push and TOTP and OTP passwords through that same system and have the visibility and the confluence of all these different solutions using one username and password and a token to log into. But yeah, it's been a challenge, and I think it's going to continue to be a challenge probably for another 10, 15, 20 years, because as the older generation, even including myself, working around there, is my peers that aren't IT nerds, they don't want to change, and it's just a little bit harder. And to Rich's point, depending on where they're at in the company, they're going to be the immovable stone, and they'll have to just see something. And in some cases, it's like many things in life, it has to happen to you before you realize the importance of it. Someone can tell you, you can get a PowerPoint, you can have phishing emails, you can hear me do training or whatever, but until that identity's stolen, until someone drains your bank account, until someone breaks in and the finger is pointed at you, you're probably gonna go, it's not gonna happen to me, right? And so it's gonna be interesting.
It's funny. I'm going to speak for myself, and I bet you guys have probably likewise have had the same thought. There's been days where I've thought, it would be nice if we could almost have a public service kind of thing, where as an senior IT person, and I use senior in multiple definitions of the word in this case, is to, as a public service, to be able to have go to the library like once a month and just invite people in and say, look, let's go over how you use your phone, let's go over how you use your bank accounts. I mean, just so people understand, because the senior people are the ones that are most at risk, and they're also the ones that are most adverse to changing.
Well, and you got to think about it too, is if we think about when we all went to school, even though it's varying generations even here, is everyone started to have accounting and checkbook classes. Who teaches a checkbook now? So while the checkbook class has left the theater, I think cybersecurity class should be the thing that replaces that, because that's where all banking and interaction with almost the whole world goes on now. So I think we need to change, we should still have personal finance and accounting. You shouldn't just borrow money forever. And, there's all kinds of other things associated with that. But I think cybersecurity should be put into kind of that high school world, especially as people start getting jobs and credit, because sometimes there's no takebacks for bad decisions.
Yeah, and I would like to say that, if I could jump in real quick, sorry, to your point of educating the older generation as well. I can say personally that thankfully, the girl at Walgreens told my dad that he really didn't need to buy this gift card to pay Microsoft to fix his computer, or he would have never known that he'd been compromised. And mind you, my dad was a Coble programmer in the 60s. All right, I mean, he's been working with computers his whole life, and he was fooled into believing that he needed to buy a gift card in order to get Microsoft to fix the infection on his computer. So yeah, I think there should be some education. I think there needs to be some stuff that would be like an interesting public service that might be brought about.
I think in finance, though, I mean, obviously I work in finance primarily, and we've done quite I mean, we've got massive layers of protection in there, right? We've got red teams and purple teams sitting hidden in the environment looking for things going on. We've got all sorts of monitoring. We've got all sorts of MFA and endpoint MFA and all sorts of things. But I mean, one of the things that struck me is the phishing awareness campaigns that they send out via email, right? And the way it goes is if you fall for it twice, you get sent on a training course, which lasts 8 hours, which nobody wants to go on once they get sent. So people have really started picking up on it. And I noticed noticed the other day, I actually sent out to a bunch of people a link to something, and because I'd pasted it out of OneNote, it wasn't the full web link. It had actually put like a sort of short description over the top, and 30 people out of the 35 I sent it to reported it as a phishing email, which I know is a false positive, but it means to say that they're sat there and looking at things, and they're starting to understand what a potential phish can look like. So we are, in finance, possibly maybe it's limited to that, but we are making some decent inroads in there.
Well, it's glad to hear, and it's funny that I'm glad to hear that finance organizations are starting to do the false searching, I guess, if you will, to see if they're getting people. That way, they can make put educational campaigns around that. Because, yeah, I mean, my parents, my mother-in-law, those kinds of things. I can't imagine how they have the ability to sort these things out. I mean, there's even times where I get emails or things I have to think about it and go, is that really something that I want to do? So it's weird. Anyways, we went a little bit off track, but it's good that we have this discussion. So we talked earlier a little bit about collaboration stuff. So let's jump back into that. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes with the collaboration tools, the changes of Zoom, the optimization packs and those kinds of things. And we talked about how that impacts the endpoints and those kinds of things. So, I mean, but there's been a lot. I mean, Teams, Zoom, Cisco WebEx Teams, Google Meet, they've all improved dramatically over the last 18 months. I mean, are you guys starting to recognize any trends or anything changes or new features? What's the new thing, I guess, if you will, when it comes to these collaboration tools? And of course, the Stratodesk thing, I got to throw this out. Obviously, we support all of them. So, if you need to have collaboration tools for your endpoints, obviously we support those. So, but I mean, again, question is what's next with collaboration? Do we see any new trending factors or anything?
I think with Teams in particular, that obviously I see a lot of and work a lot with. Teams has almost become like a workspace for a lot of people. It's not just about chat and meetings anymore. It's about sharing files. It's about the integration with SharePoint. It's about working on things together in there and storing data. And again, it's become one of these, I think when we did our GDPR compliance, they call it unstructured data. It's not a database where things are held in particular areas. It's all just thrown in there and everybody's sharing it and sending it around and linking it together. And as I say, it's become a place where people spend most of their day. I've noticed before you used to be able to send an email to people and that would kind of almost be the priority thing to respond to, whereas now the more people I see sharing their screens who've got hundreds and thousands of unread emails in their inbox, and their primary way of working is through Teams and SharePoint. So it is developing sort of that way as being the kind of, I don't know, everybody's got several things that'll try and grab their attention, but Teams is almost the foremost one for a lot of people. So I think it will continue to develop like that. And it'll be interesting to see how Microsoft, because you've got all the integration with things like Stream and things like that, which is quite cool and quite handy, for sharing videos and things like that. So I think that whole office space Teams might well become the front end into there. As I say, there's better things out there, right? Slack, I think, probably is an easier and better thing to use, but Microsoft will give you Teams for no extra cost, right? So it's just going to keep on ramping up and ramping up.
Well, it depends on how you feel about the new huddle feature. So with Slack, I'll just leave that there. So, anyways, Rich, Patrick, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say, right now I see so many collaboration tools and everything jumping about, and you're seeing, all the different functionality, and I kind of wish there would be a couple winners. I mean, I am getting bombarded throughout the day from Teams and text messages and emails and Slack, and it's like, okay, let's pick one. You know what I mean? And the problem is when, in a position like me where you're working with multiple different customers, everybody has their own that they prefer, right? And so now you've got all these different collaboration devices. So if anybody's listening out there as a developer, if you can come up with something that would aggregate everything together, that would be awesome. Because there are so many inputs coming in, and I kind of thought when Citrix had jumped up on and bought Reich, I kind of thought they were kind of grabbing a little bit, but it's not quite as far as I want to go. But I need to be able to, I can get told, by one boss to do something in a text message, and somebody else sends an email, and this guy sends me a Teams message, and now I'm trying to keep, okay, which track where went why, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I did see we've got a few. There are some other ones like we've got one customer that came up with a phone system that I'd never even heard of before that they use, and I think it's more for call center type things. But so having all the different collaboration tools is nice. When like a lot of our law firms, their biggest challenges are you see all those names there. Add Ring Central, add what we're on now, go to meeting and all the rest of that. Add all of those devices in there. All of our law firms have a client that runs each of those. And so their thin client or their virtual desktop has to be able to support every single one of the collaboration devices, because when I'm talking to this customer or to this person, I need to have this one. When I'm talking to that one, I need to have that one. So it definitely gets a challenge. I am kind of wishing that maybe 2 or 3 would win so that we can narrow down where that attention is going to.
To your point, right? We need a universal streaming or receiver client, I guess, if you will, that can connect to multiple different protocols and multiple different websites and collaborate it all or aggregate it all into one feed, right? Because yeah, I have the same issue, between Slack and Teams and Zoom, and I switch between platforms probably 5 to 6 times a day. I mean, even just going from the last meeting I was on to this one to the one I have next, there are 3 different platforms. So yeah, it's somewhat painful. And then
on my phone, I still have the old BlackBerry Hub on there on my Android phone, and that aggregates quite a lot of your stuff together. So it would be cool if you had a desktop version of that, particularly one that could take Teams messages from multiple tenants. That would be awesome.
So there we go. So we just came up with a new application requirement on the fly, guys.
Yeah, that's like $1 billion idea right there. Whoever can make the aggregator for those types of things. I don't want to be that person that makes that, because the security stuff would be exciting, but it would be functionality for a user would be epic.
Well, imagine trying to get Microsoft and Google to work together. I mean, that could be a challenge in itself.
Yeah, you would just literally probably have to just play monkey in the middle with APIs, right? And be able to do tokens with each one of them, and I guess have to store it somewhere in between, so that then you could feed the message back. So very cool concept.
So, well, guys, we're coming up on the hour. We're only 8 minutes away, and we got 2 slides left. But and we've kind of touched on both of them a little bit. So, I mean, let's just go around the table real quick on the last 2 slides, so we can not run people past the hour too far. So obviously we talked about the different the anti screen capture and the keyboard keyloggers and those kinds of things. I mean, and Patrick, I want to go to you on this one first. Is you talked about the intrusions via the unlocked doors, and I think people just understanding the what you see about that, and the aspects of how that occurs so frequently.
Yeah, I mean, the most common attack avenue is missing patches, right? And not keeping up with that, and then that's where exploits can run. And then exploits also run because of bad configurations, right? Where security policies are still set in the 90s, where landman passwords are still good, right? They can be cracked in seconds and everything else. So a lot of that is patching and policies, and then everything after that it varies. But I mean, the biggest problem, I think, the biggest bullet you have down there is just ransomware. As the rise of that and corporate espionage and multi-million-dollar payouts are happening, I think that only makes it worse for all of us in the IT industry, because the more money that's paid, the more research and development they have, right? They're using this money to make more money, just like a legitimate business, just doing it in an illegitimate way. So I think that's going to make it really tough for the industry. I think you're going to start seeing a lot more security, people changing their messaging on product to be security oriented. And there's not a silver bullet that prevents all ransomware. There's not a silver bullet that prevents all AV or exploitation. So it's just like James said, it's defense in depth. It's lots of layers is what you have to do. So you've got to have good patching, you've got to have good policies, you got to have endpoint management of some kind, endpoint protection, and then logging and stuff like that to have a chance to be able to react to some of these things. But big payouts on ransomware, I think, are the biggest threat to our IT industry.
Well, and the scary thing is, I don't think we will ever know how many are actually occurring daily that just never get publicized. Obviously we hear
Yeah.
about the colonial pipelines and those kinds of things, but I mean, how many of these are actually occurring that we never hear anything about, right? So that's kind of frightening. So
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a large percentage that are probably happening and no one knows because they're not disclosing, right? And they're paying and not disclosing that either. So it's the tip of the iceberg, in my opinion. So if we know that about 80 million to 100 million dollars have been paid out this year alone in ransom, you might want to double or triple that for everyone that didn't report. That's the
well, I
tip
was
of the
gonna say,
iceberg.
and James, I mean, sorry, Rich, if that was you, I didn't mean to cut you off, but James, I mean, being in focusing on the financial industry, I mean, I'm sure you probably have NDAs with a lot of your customers, but it'd be interesting, how many backdoor, ransomware things that you're aware of that people, like I said, just never become public.
Well, yes, without saying anything, possibly I might have been around at some points when I've heard, big shake-ups coming from particular business units, and the word on the grapevine is that it was a ransomware attack. I mean, they don't even tell anybody within that, right? So, yeah, I have heard of things happening which may or may not be accurate. But as I say, a lot of it's just, and I mean, we've got a massive sort of defense in-depth strategy. I mean, the other day I was actually I tried to send an email to my machine out of a financial services environment just so I'd work on a PowerPoint in a bigger sort of on a bigger screen, and my account was locked about 10 minutes later, and my boss rang me and said, "You've been moving architectural documents out of the environment." I was like, "Well, I only wanted to work on it," that sort of thing. So they are very, very aware now, and obviously to the extent where even kind of normal sort of traffic, for want of a better word, is being jumped upon very, very much. But as you say, it only takes one of those layers to fail, right? It's like being the centre forward for a football team. You've only got to score one goal, whereas you're a defender, you've got to stop him every single time, right? And that's what you're up against. And you've got to expect that it's going to happen sooner or later. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot of now is they're clamping down on how people administer things, right? As an admin, I now have to jump through so many more hoops to get things done. I've got to check out passwords. They're only valid for one machine for a certain period of time. I've got to log on to a particular box that's got endpoint MFA attached. When I get onto that box, I can't get near the internet. So if I want to download something, I've got to go back to my desktop, go out another way, get it passed through an internal repository and checked and things like that. And all these things make me feel like things are happening slower for me, because they are. But at the end of the day, they're happening not just to protect the company, but to protect me as well, right? So, but as I said, even, when I got that email the other day that said you moved something out, so I just moved it via the Citrix virtual channel instead, and nobody noticed that. So there are still backdoors in the environment.
No, yeah, well, let's not use the word backdoor, right? That makes people afraid. But no, yeah, as long as there's IT out there, we're always going to find ways to get things done. I mean, obviously, we have to be able to do our jobs. But to your point, it becomes, a little bit more and more challenging every day, trying to figure out, how do I get to that file from where? And I deal with a large retailer, and it's constantly challenged where they say, hey, we need to be able to do this. It's like, okay, well, I need to see the support file, and they got to jump through 6 hoops to be able to, like you said, to be able to collect the data so we can take a look at it, and then trying to get it out to us, so it's ever a challenge. So Rich, I didn't want to cut you off. If you said something, you have some feedback on that? Or
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one of the things that we need to do from a security standpoint, and I think a lot of single sign-on, MFA, and other functions are coming in to do this, and I'm kind of looking towards to FIDO2 and some other functionalities that'll enable it for us, is that we need to make it so that the users can work safely without having to jump through 27 different hoops. If we can do that, and they're working safely and they don't realize that they've gone through these 27 different hoops, I think that's going to be better, because to James's point, having to go through all those things, it is slowing down the work, it's slowing down getting things done. So how do we, and I don't have the answer for that. There are answers that are coming up, and also when talking about ransomware, I think one of the things that the dangerous turn that's been taken is, a lot of people are getting smarter about doing immutable backups, and a lot of people are getting smarter about making sure I can recover right away. And so what they're doing now is that they're taking the data and threatening to release the data, right? So even if I can recover the information and have myself back up and operating in an hour or two, because I've got that capability on my backup side, I may still have to pay that ransom keep, like we had one of our customers, they had to pay the ransom because they were threatening to release their patented data, right? They released that out there. It could cost them way more than that if somebody else came along and was able to do the same thing, and they're from China and they don't care about what a patent is, right? So it's definitely getting a lot scarier when it comes to those kind of things. But I think we need to make it to where it's easier for the users to be safe, because then they're going to do it.
Well, and that kind of jumps to the good, thanks for the lead in. Really, you set me up for the last slide here. And that's understanding how the users work, how these different tools and applications are going to impact them. How do we make their work as easy as it's always been, but yet make it secure, make it accessible, make it manageable, make it controllable, give them the tools that they need to be able to do their jobs, to be able to have the collaboration things. We've got in here, remote work, is it staying, obviously I think remote work is kind of still going to be a hybrid. There's going to be a lot of that, right? People are, some organizations are saying, yeah, we're moving back. In fact, one of my neighbors works for a large organization, manufacturing organization, and they're going to where, it's kind of a 3-2, right? 3 days at home, 2 days in the office, and they got kind of like an A and B shift, if you will. That way they don't have 100% of the workforce in the office at any one point. So I think there's going to be a lot of that hybrid type of thing. So the ability to support them, via VDI, whatever your platform is, whether it's 365, Citrix, whether it's Horizon, whatever it is, and then having those collaboration tools. But one of the things that we talked about in here is, the Continuum and the Samsung Dex, again, the user experience, providing those tools, are those things going to continue? And then of course, obviously, what's your guys' thought on, the adoption of Windows 11? Obviously, there's going to be some big changes there as well. So again, the plug for Stratodesk is obviously we support, the ability to manage those endpoints and the different applications and VDI and collaboration tools. So those things are obviously important, and that's what we do. But going back to understanding the user's work and the impact on all of this stuff. So James, you want to kind of, if you will, I don't want to kill us off, because I think this has been an interesting conversation, but at the same point, I want to make sure we don't run too long. So you want final thoughts and input?
Yeah, I mean, with regards to remote work, I think you're right. It is going to become a hybrid for a lot of people. I mean, I've worked from home for years, right? And I was quite happy doing it. But I think one of the parts now, I've got about 4 laptops around me at the minute, as well as a desktop. And it's becoming, I think I've outgrown my office space for one thing. But also, I think I might go and get myself an office, because it would be nice to still go to work and be able to finish work at a particular time. Because one thing I've found during the lockdowns is that I've been working stupidly long hours, and now it's really starting to grind upon me like that. So I think from almost a flip side perspective, yeah, let's give people the option to be able to switch off when they can, because if you're at home, it becomes very difficult. Talking about the Continuum and the Dex stuff, I think they were a bit gimmicky, to be perfectly honest. I mean, it may evolve like that, but most people do have a device of some sort, if only to work offline or to be able to do some things, when they go to a different office and have that kind of thing. So you're not always going to be able to plug a different device in there. As I said, it might come along. And as for Windows 11, Windows 11 just feels a bit funny to me. It just feels like an evolution of Windows 10 where they've upgraded the icons, basically. I mean, I know we've got the hardware requirements out there that a lot of people are complaining about, but I thought Microsoft had done a really good job of the Windows 10 model. When they first announced it, I thought, oh, this could be bad, but they've done a really good job of building confidence in that kind of rolling upgrade that they're doing, and they've evolved it rather than, sort of hit you with a big bang. And are we going back now to the big bang model? I don't understand why they would want to do that. It seems a very odd move for them, given all the success they've had with Windows 10. So it seems a bit strange.
Yeah. All right, Rich, final thoughts, inputs?
I think hybrid work is here to stay. I think there was a survey done last summer that showed 78% of people wanted to be able to work hybridly. That was actually even higher than the number of people who wanted to work remotely from a percentage standpoint. I think there's some human interaction that we lack when we always work remote 100% of the time. There's some advantage to gathering in a room and having a meeting with people face to face. But I do think that that flexibility is great. I think it gives us that capability to to be remote when we need to be remote and be local when we need to be local. As far as the devices, I don't think the devices are ever going to stop evolving. I think we're going to spend the next 50 years going, what's the next best thing that comes along? How does it work? And so on and so forth. I think I've seen some of the sci-fi trends where they roll out the screen in front of them, and it's just like a sheet of aluminum foil or something. But anyway, I think there's a lot of different ways that we can interact with our environment and our surroundings. Windows 11, the biggest thing I'm looking forward to there is the trusted platform module. I think getting into TPM 2.0 and some of that others from the security standpoint is going to give us a little more control and allow us to, again, to operate more securely without putting undue effort on the end users.
Very good. Patrick?
Yeah, I think both of them covered all that well. I'm with James on being a big reboot of 11. So many years of 10 and starting over again of like this Windows XP 7 Vista ME. It's like some of this stuff is like boomeranging back. I thought that they would be kind of like what Mac OS X has done for the past 10, 15 years is just iterations, updates. Now, of course, some things can't be supported on older platforms, but you just keep on going. And it seems like 11 is like a new starting point that they're going to do. Windows 11, 21 H1, 21 H2, 21 H3, and it makes me feel like with that announcement, I'm worried that it'll kind of drown some of the development where Windows 10 still has to get lots of hugs and kisses for the next 5 years for 21 H2 that's going to get released, and it's going to have to get patched and all it. And now you've got Windows 11, so you have a whole new branch / fork that they're going to have to maintain, and there's going to be so many ands and ors. I think that's going to complicate, especially the enterprise space of what you can do with one versus what you can do with the other. Is it supported in Citrix, VMware, Microsoft, or WorkSpot, or whoever your broker is? I don't know. And then there's known, and I'm looking for like James when he gets into it a little bit deeper was Windows 11, because I'm looking forward to see the logon time differences, right? And when we talk about enterprise and user performance, I'm looking forward to see what Windows 11 does or doesn't do when it comes to user experience, let alone clickies and widgets and, Clippy's back knocking on the door or something. So I think it's going to be a cool time, and it's going to keep evolving, and work from home is just going to keep growing. So I think hopefully a lot of people are going to pay more attention to security and some of those strategies there as like a hacker nerdy dude. But I'm still excited because I think it's cool. It's cool to walk around and, see, like Raspberry Pis and stuff like that, being able to still be something that's valuable for certain organizations as that cheap commodity kind of endpoint. But it's just times are changing and it's moving, so it's cool stuff.
Well, that's funny. We made it all the way to the 67th minute before the Raspberry Pi came into the discussion today, which is usually a shocker because it comes up so often. So, anyways, I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining. I mean, you guys, all of you three, thank you for joining us. I mean, obviously, there's so many different environmental impacts on our users today, whether they be VDI, whether they be collaboration tools, whether it be security aspects, and there's just so many different approaches. So I appreciate, the three of you guys having feedback and having the discussion with us. And obviously at Stratodesk, we address most of those things with No Touch OS and the things that we do. So, and I encourage anybody that's listening, to reach out to you guys, obviously, Conversant Group, James Rankin, obviously Patrick, VDI Sec. So you guys, thank you for joining and participating today. I appreciate your time and efforts, and it was awesome to have a conversation with you guys.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Y'all have a great one. Thank
you. All
y'all.
right, guys. Thanks. Have a great week. Cheers.
Cheers.